Mr. Graywell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to witnesses for testifying today. Ms. Tedesco, is that correct?
Yes.
You mentioned after what happened at Wells Fargo that you guys did a proactive research on what are the sales techniques being done by Canadian banks. Involved in that report, did you guys actually go to the branch level and witness how a customer comes into the branch and the interactions a customer may have with a customer service rep, or better known as a teller?
So if I said that, I misspoke.
No, I'm asking, was that part of your report?
At this point, there is no report.
No, this was in the response to the testimony you gave on what happened after Wells Fargo.
Yes.
Right? You said that you guys looked at your current sales practices.
No, so what we did is we looked at our complaints in the same area.
Okay.
So complaints in the areas of express consent and disclosure. And we went back 3 years to see what they look like. And what we determined was that the number remained stable year over year. But even despite the fact that there was no red flag, if you will, from our complaints perspective, we continued to monitor incoming complaints, and we decided to focus our next industry review on sales practices to gather more information about sales practices, because we knew what was going on in the United States. We wanted to find out what was going on in Canada. So we decided to
As part of your report now, will that include somebody going into a bank and having interactions with customer service representatives?
So we are definitely going to do some mystery shopping type exercise, but
Perfect.
I can let Richard.
That's fine. I just wanted to make sure it was included,
okay.
because of my experience as a customer of one of the big banks is that every time I go in, and if I go to various different branches, I'm always being told, oh, why don't you buy the unlimited thing? Oh, what are you going to do with this balance in your account? You should invest it in mutual funds, right?
Yes.
And that's all well and good, because banks are profit driven. And I want to say that we're not picking on the banks here. We're saying is that, at a certain point, what happens is that they're taking advantage of vulnerable Canadians that do not have the financial literacy to make these decisions, especially when something like banking comes up. Banking happens on a weekly basis, especially if you come from my riding in Brampton East, where the classic bank model still exists, in which that people do their banking in person. Right? And then TD goes over and above. So I'll example one of the banks, and they hire people that speak fluently in Punjabi and Hindi and Cantonese and Mandarin, so they can speak directly to seniors or new immigrants who are working really hard and open accounts in these institutions, and still, because of where they come from, don't trust that their money is going to go deposited through a machine or doing it online. So they come hand the cash to see it being deposited into their bank. And I feel like those are the type of customers that are vulnerable to deceptive sales practices, and we need to do a better job of protecting them. And then I further want to say is that when it comes to protecting consumers, something that I find completely unbelievable is the fact that advisor, spelled with an O, and advisor is spelled with an E. One is a regulated title and one is an unregulated title, yet banks use them both. If you know about this, why wasn't that put to a stop like right away?
Tedesco?
So the issue of advisor with an E or an O is an issue that, again, deals with securities, and we don't have oversight over.
That's fine. The only question is, was this ever flagged? At a certain point, it's not about the jurisdictional comment, right? Because, there's only one taxpayer, right? Your job is to protect Canadians, right, at the end of the day. So I'll pass it off to the Canadian Bankers Association, right? Your members are taking advantage of this glitch. Now, you could pass on the buck to me and say it's not federal jurisdiction, and that's fine. You're well within your legal right to do that. I totally understand the constitutional argument. But at a certain point, don't you think that an E and an O, and saying that a customer service rep can use financial advisor as a title because it's unregulated is the definition of deception?
I'm really glad you've raised this, because there's a lot of misunderstanding around this issue, and I'll let my colleague Ms. Stevens speak on it here for a moment, because I think it really needs clarification.
Yeah, advisor is a term with the E that is used in securities regulation for a defined set of functions, but an advisor is a more generic term. But the reality is that people are regulated based on their function and activity. So if they're doing certain functions would fall within the advisor with an E category, they would be regulated that way.
So
Put another way, if you're in a regulated institution doing a regulated activity, the regulator is going to regulate you, and one vowel isn't going to change that.
it's a lot of regulations in one sentence.
Speaks to the industry.
I will say this, that if you're a normal Canadian and you walk into one of the big six banks and you come into, let's say, a university student that's working the TEL that day, and his title is financial advisor, the unregulated version, and he makes a pitch to you saying that you can save X by switching to X account, and you should invest your money in Y, and he gives that advice and you rely on that advice, that's an unregulated securities transaction, in my opinion. And from my experience, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, this occurs more often than not at our banks. And that, I believe, is an issue. And again, I'm not picking on the banks here. I just find it amazing that they would actually issue business cards between advisor with an E and an advisor with an O. Like, it just seems like a problem they shouldn't want to have. Wouldn't you agree?
As I just said, in this case, candidly, it's a distinction without a difference from a regulatory point of view. But at the end of the day, you should certainly expect, as a customer, that when you go in, the financial advice you're getting, irrespective of the title, is appropriate to your financial situation, and that the products and services that are provided to you suit your financial circumstance. That's what every institution strives to achieve, and that's what builds a strong customer relationship, and that's what builds a lasting customer relationship.
Okay, we will have to leave it at that. Is there any last comments that you want to make, Ms. Tedesco?
I just maybe picking up on that last point, if you're referring to perhaps tellers who are using the title of advisor, bank titles we don't oversee. It's not a specific consumer provision in the Bank Act, and that's what we oversee. However, if they're selling, if they're opening accounts, if they're selling credit cards, they have to communicate with people, consumers who are approaching them to purchase these things in a clear, simple manner that is not misleading. So that we can oversee.